I'll never forget the sound of their laughter. It cut through the clinking of wine glasses and soft classical music like a knife. There I was, sitting in one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, wearing my best dress, my natural curls framing my face the way my grandmother taught me they should, and these three women at the table next to us, they were laughing. At me. At my hair. At my family. What happened in the next 60 seconds humiliated me in ways I didn't think possible. But what happened 2 weeks later, that changed everything I thought I knew about power, justice, and who's really watching when we think nobody cares. Stay with me, because this story will make you question everything you think you know about standing up for yourself. And if this resonates with you, hit that subscribe button, because stories like these need to be heard. My name is Simone, and I work as an assistant manager at a luxury hotel downtown. I'm 28 years old, and I've spent the last 6 years working my way up from the front desk. The job doesn't pay as much as you'd think, not when you're living in a city where a one-bedroom apartment costs more than most people's monthly salary. But I'm proud of what I do. I help people. I make their stays memorable. I solve problems. That night, though, I wasn't solving problems. I was celebrating. My baby sister, Nicole, had just graduated from nursing school. After 4 years of late-night studying, double shifts at the diner to pay tuition, and more tears than I can count, she finally did it. My mother, who raised us both on a nurse's salary after Dad passed, was beaming with pride. Even my niece, Kendra, who's only 7, seemed to understand this was a big deal. We were all dressed up, excited, nervous. I'd made a reservation at Le Bernardin, this French restaurant that people wait months to get into. I'd been saving for half a year just for this one dinner. When we walked in, I felt it immediately. You know that feeling when you enter a room and you just know you're not welcome? The hostess looked us up and down with these cold eyes. Her smile was plastic, the kind you give to people you're forced to be polite to. She checked her computer screen 3 times, like she was hoping our reservation would magically disappear. Finally, she led us to a table right next to the kitchen doors. Not near the windows where other families sat, not in the main dining area with the soft lighting and the view. Right where the servers rushed past carrying trays, where the heat from the kitchen made the air thick. My mother touched my hand. "It's fine, baby," she whispered. "We're here for Nicole." So we sat down. We opened the menus and pretended not to notice the stares. And that's when I heard them. 3 women at the table beside us. Designer handbags hanging off their chairs, jewelry that probably cost more than my car, dressed like they were going to a charity gala and not just dinner. One of them, a blonde woman with lips so full of filler they barely moved when she talked, leaned toward her friends. But she didn't whisper. She wanted us to hear. "Is that hair even professional?" she said, looking directly at me. My heart stopped. I reached up instinctively, touching my curls. I'd spent an hour that morning moisturizing them, defining each coil, making sure they looked beautiful. My grandmother had taught me to love my natural hair. She used to say our curls told a story, that they were a crown we wore with pride. But in that moment, under that woman's gaze, I felt small. Her friend, a redhead with a face that looked like it had been stretched tight by too many surgeries, laughed. "I'm surprised they let people like that in here. How did they even afford this place?" People like that. The words hung in the air like poison. Nicole's hand tightened around her menu. My mother's eyes dropped to the table. Little Kendra looked confused, glancing between us and them, trying to understand why the pretty ladies were being mean. I wanted to say something. I wanted to stand up and tell them exactly what I thought. But my throat closed up. Because I knew. I knew that if I made a scene, we'd be the problem, not them, us. Other diners started looking, some pretended not to hear, suddenly very interested in their plates. Others pulled out their phones, and I could see them angling the cameras toward us. We were becoming a spectacle. The angry black family making a scene at the nice restaurant. Except we weren't making a scene. We were just existing. And then the manager appeared. A thin man in an expensive suit with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He approached our table, leaning down slightly, his voice low and condescending. "Excuse me," he said, not looking at me, but at some point beyond my shoulder. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at our casual dining location across town. We can certainly arrange transportation if needed." My mouth fell open. "We have a reservation," I managed to say. "We can pay. We belong here." He straightened up, his smile fading. "I don't think you understand the atmosphere we maintain here. We have certain standards, and I've received complaints from other guests about disruptions." We hadn't said a word. We hadn't done anything. The only disruption was those women and their cruel laughter. But I knew what he meant. We were the disruption, our presence, our existence in this space. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said, louder now, loud enough for everyone to hear. The three women were full on laughing now. One of them held up her phone, recording everything. My mother stood up, dignity in every movement, despite the tears forming in her eyes. Nicole grabbed her purse, her jaw tight with anger. And Kendra, sweet Kendra, looked up at me with those big brown eyes and asked, "Auntie Simone, why don't they like your pretty hair?" I had no answer. How do you explain hatred to a 7-year-old? How do you tell her that some people will judge her before she even opens her mouth just because of how she looks? Security guards appeared. Not one, but two, like we were dangerous criminals. They escorted us through the restaurant, past tables full of people who either stared or looked away. The hostess held the door open with that same fake smile. And just like that, we were standing on the sidewalk outside, our special night destroyed, our dignity stripped away in front of dozens of strangers. I tried so hard not to cry on that sidewalk. My mother held me, but I could feel her shaking. Nicole was furious, pulling out her phone, talking about lawyers and lawsuits and posting everything online. But I stopped her, because what were we going to do? Sue them? With what money? We couldn't afford to fight people like that. They had power. They had resources. They had a world that protected them and blamed us. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. Guests would ask me questions, and I'd have to ask them to repeat themselves. My mind kept replaying that night, the laughter, the stares, the way that manager looked at me like I was garbage he needed to take out. I stood in the hotel bathroom, staring at my reflection, at my beautiful curls, and for the first time in years, I thought about straightening them, about burning them into submission, about making myself smaller, quieter, less threatening to people who didn't deserve my consideration. But then I remembered my grandmother's hands in my hair, her voice telling me I was beautiful exactly as I was, and I got angry. Not the loud, explosive kind of angry, the quiet, determined kind. The kind that makes you take action even when you know it probably won't matter. I filed a formal complaint with the restaurant's corporate office. I wrote down everything that happened, every word, every look, every moment of that humiliation. I sent it off, expecting nothing. Because people like me, we don't get justice. We get told to move on, to be professional, to not make waves. Days passed, then a week. No response. Nicole had shared what happened with friends, and it spread through our community. People were supportive, outraged even, but nothing changed. The restaurant stayed open, those women probably never thought about us again, and I went back to work, avoiding mirrors, feeling like I'd lost something I couldn't name. Then, exactly 1 week after that awful night, something strange happened. A guest checked into the hotel. Not just any guest, Mr. Laurent Baptiste. If you don't know the name, that's probably intentional on his part. The man is worth billions. He made his fortune in luxury hospitality, real estate, investment properties all over the world. Hotels, resorts, restaurants. He's famously private, rarely gives interviews, and when he travels, he demands absolute perfection. And he requested me, specifically, by name. My supervisor called me into her office, looking confused. Mr. Laurent wants you to be his personal concierge during his stay. Did you help him before? I don't see any record of it. I had no idea who this man was beyond his reputation. I'd never met him and never interacted with him. But when a billionaire asks for you by name, you don't ask questions. You say yes. He was staying in our penthouse suite. When I knocked on his door, I expected someone intimidating, cold, demanding. Instead, I met a man in his early 60s with kind eyes and silver hair. He was black, which surprised me, though I don't know why it should have. He invited me in, offered me tea, and spoke to me like I was a person, not a servant. "Simone," he said, his voice deep and warm, "I need you to arrange something for me. A dinner reservation. Somewhere exclusive." "Of course, sir. Where would you like to dine?" "Le Bernardin." My blood turned to ice. My hands started shaking. He noticed immediately. "You know the place?" he asked gently. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. He walked to his desk and picked up an envelope, a thick, cream-colored envelope with my name written on it in elegant handwriting. He held it out to me. "I need someone who understands discrimination," he said quietly. "Someone who knows what it feels like to be judged before you've spoken a word. Read this tonight, then decide if you'll help me." I took the envelope with trembling hands. He dismissed me politely, and I practically ran back to my apartment. My roommate was out, so I was alone when I opened it. Inside was a letter, written by hand, that made me cry harder than I'd cried in years. Mr. Baptiste had been at Le Bernardin that night. He'd been dining in a private room upstairs, one with glass walls overlooking the main restaurant. He saw everything. The women's cruelty, the manager's prejudice, our humiliation, our forced removal. He witnessed it all. The letter explained that his mother was black, his father white. She'd faced discrimination her entire life, subtle and overt. She'd been followed in stores, denied service at restaurants, passed over for promotions despite being more qualified than her colleagues. She'd taught him about dignity, about standing tall, even when the world tried to make you small. She died 5 years ago, never seeing justice for the countless times she'd been humiliated. Since then, he'd been fighting these battles quietly, using his money, his influence, his power to create change where he could. He saw what happened to me, to my family, and he couldn't let it go. He wouldn't let it go. "Help me teach them a lesson," the letter ended. "Trust me, sometimes justice needs a witness." The next morning, Mr. Baptiste explained his plan. 2 weeks earlier, the day after my complaint went ignored, he'd begun purchasing shares in the restaurant group that owned Le Bernardin, quietly, through various investment firms, until he owned a controlling stake. The board didn't even know yet. They thought they were having a routine quarterly meeting to discuss profits and expansion. They had no idea what was coming. He wanted me there, not as a concierge, as his newly appointed Director of Hospitality Standards, a position he'd just created, A title that meant I had authority, power, a voice. The board meeting was scheduled for the next day. I was terrified. I told him I couldn't do it, that I wasn't qualified, that they'd see right through it, that I'd make everything worse. But he looked at me with those kind eyes and said something I'll never forget. Simone, you are the most qualified person in that room because you know what it feels like to be on the other side of power. And that's the only qualification that matters for what we're about to do. The meeting was held in a glass conference room on the top floor of a downtown building. Floor to ceiling windows, a table that probably cost more than my annual salary, and leather chairs that looked like thrones. When I walked behind Mr. Baptiste, I saw them all, the restaurant owners, the investors, the regional managers. And there, sitting near the back, was the manager who'd thrown us out. He'd probably been called in to report on performance metrics or customer satisfaction. He had no idea why he was really there. And sitting in the guest section, because apparently they'd been invited to observe, were the three women. Turns out, two of them were married to major investors in the restaurant group. The third was the daughter of another board member. They were there to network, to be seen, to maintain their little throne of privilege. When the manager saw me walk in beside Mr. Baptiste, his face went white. Actually white. One of the women grabbed her friend's arm, whispering urgently. They recognized me. They knew. Mr. Baptiste introduced me as his Director of Hospitality Standards. I saw the confusion on their faces, the barely hidden disdain. Who was I to be in this room? Why was I sitting at that table? Mr. Baptiste didn't give them time to ask. Before we discuss quarterly earnings, he said, his voice calm but carrying absolute authority, I want to address a concerning pattern I've discovered in this establishment's operations. He pressed a button on a remote, and the screen behind him came to life. Security footage from that night. Crystal clear, with audio. Every moment. The women's comments about my hair, their speculation about whether we could afford to eat there, their cruel laughter. The manager's condescending tone, his immediate assumption that we were the problem, our family's dignity as we were escorted out while other diners recorded us like we were entertainment. The room was silent. You could hear people breathing. The manager had his head down, staring at the table. The three women looked sick, their expensive makeup suddenly unable to hide their guilt. But Mr. Baptiste wasn't done. He revealed the results of an investigation his team had conducted over the past 2 weeks. 47 similar complaints over 3 years. 47 times that black, brown, or not wealthy-looking guests had been discriminated against at this restaurant. Complaints about being seated near bathrooms or kitchens, about being asked to prepay for meals, about being followed by staff, about being asked to leave for dress code violations that white guests were never questioned about. 47 complaints, all filed with corporate, all ignored. More than that, they'd found training materials, actual documents that taught staff how to discourage certain clientele, how to make unwanted guests uncomfortable enough to leave without explicitly saying they weren't welcome. Code words, subtle tactics, plausible deniability. It was systematic. It was intentional. It was evil. Mr. Baptiste let the silence stretch. Then he spoke again, his voice harder now. As of this morning, I hold a controlling stake in this restaurant group, which means I have the authority to make immediate changes. Effective now, the following individuals are terminated. He read names. The manager who threw us out, 3 other staff members who'd been identified as key players in the discrimination, the regional director who'd ignored the complaints. The 3 women's husbands tried to interrupt, to defend themselves, to claim they had no knowledge of any of this. Mr. Baptiste silenced them with a look. You have two options, he told them. Divest your shares immediately and walk away, or I pull all my investment, tank the stock price, and bankrupt this entire operation. You have 24 hours to decide. Then he turned to the rest of the board. The restaurant would undergo a complete transformation. Mandatory diversity training for all staff, a community advisory board with real power to review complaints and policies, quarterly audits by an independent firm, and oversight of this entire process would fall to his new Director of Hospitality Standards. Me. It would fall to me. This isn't about revenge, Mr. Baptiste said, looking directly at the manager who'd humiliated me. This is about accountability. This is about every person who's been made to feel invisible, unwelcome, less than human in places that should serve everyone equally. It ends now. 6 months later, Le Bernardin reopened after extensive renovations and retraining. The reopening gala wasn't for wealthy investors or food critics. It was for community members, families like mine who'd been turned away, discriminated against, made to feel like they didn't belong. They were the guests of honor. I stood near the entrance, wearing a beautiful dress and my natural curls styled in a crown braid my grandmother would have loved. I'd spent the last months working with Mr. Baptiste, learning from him, helping to implement changes not just at this restaurant, but across his entire hospitality empire. I was no longer an assistant manager at a hotel. I was building a career fighting for dignity, for equity, for justice in spaces that had always excluded people like me. My family arrived, dressed up again, nervous again. But this time, the hostess greeted them warmly. A different hostess, trained in the new protocols, who saw people instead of prejudice. They were seated at the best table in the house, by the windows, with a view of the city lights. Kendra, my beautiful niece, looked up at me with those big brown eyes and said, "Auntie Simone, your hair is still so pretty. It's the prettiest in the whole restaurant." And you know what? She was right. I think about that night a lot. Not the humiliation, though that's still there, still painful, but what came after. Because here's what I learned. I didn't change. My hair is the same. My family is the same. My dignity, my worth, my humanity were always there. What changed was the world around me, or at least this small corner of it. Mr. Baptiste taught me something important. He said money is only power if you use it to lift others. And while most of us don't have billions to throw around, we all have power. The power of our voices, our stories, our refusal to accept being treated as less than. My complaint mattered, even when I thought it didn't. Because someone was watching, someone who cared, someone who had the resources to do something about it. Not every story has a billionaire waiting in the wings, but every voice matters. Every act of standing up for yourself, even in the face of certain defeat, matters. Because you never know who's watching. You never know whose heart you might change, whose eyes you might open, whose courage you might inspire. So this story proves that standing up for yourself is never in vain. Even when you can't see who's watching, someone always is. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more untold stories of courage and justice. And remember this. Your voice, your dignity, your worth, they're non-negotiable. Never let anyone make you feel less than extraordinary. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have done what I did? Would you have filed that complaint, even thinking nothing would come of it? Would you have trusted Mr. Baptiste? Let's talk about it, because these conversations, they matter just as much as the actions. We change the world one story, one conversation, one moment of courage at a time. Your crown is already on your head. Don't ever let anyone make you take it off.